to jot notes. I suspect a very easy job. Okay, what's going on with the? Come on, you worked this morning. Come on, you can do it. And of course, things won't sync up. Your device is going to sleep mode. Come on. I even came in this morning and verified that this would work. Come on. This is the one that they used at the, and I'm sure this is the one I used too. I don't see anything. I don't see anything. It's trying, but it worked. I came in before the meeting and
I wonder if the switch is switched.
it switched. I'm afraid to press buttons. Something changed. Okay. That's interesting.
Something's happening.
Oh, it's green now, but it's not proof.
Oh, I thought maybe it was not a secret. But the other one's on the other screen.
My screen's flashing. Saying no signal. All right. I'm going to try my other port here, see if it matters. Shouldn't.
Have you tried do all of the ports output video on that?
Yeah. But I've
You
tried.
just have one, right?
I've tried both of them. Oh, come on.
That's a MacBook Pro. It has two ports in it, yeah.
The newer one does, yeah. I don't know what to do. See if John has. I came in this morning and it cuts off.
Let's see what I can do here.
I'm not gonna be able to get your slides without a lot of trouble.
Be sure.
Yeah, the agenda we don't need. So I will try to fix this. Imagine that there's a note well up there, and it's a new note well that Adam sent out. It's USB-C. Okay, try that.
This light should work. We have an HDMI here, right?
Yep.
We'll get this on the computer first.
Okay, I'll try this one real quick first. We got it. We're set.
One keystroke, I'll send them the help request.
Okay. So here's a note well. I guess I still need a note keeper. If the blue sheet should be going around. If anybody could take notes. Otherwise, I guess I'll go watch a video after this and capture the notes. This is the new note well, so it's a little different than the one you saw this morning, which was the old note well. So maybe some interesting reading. It's a bit of an art chart, yes. And you can find it online on the website. I'm sorry? I'll go to full screen when I get to the next presentation. Here's the agenda, and John will be talking to us, basically, is the agenda. Whoops, I need to move it over. Can't see it here. Okay, John.
There's a lot of brave people here. You guys are all sure, you're all committed now, because we are going to seal the doors at this point, and numbering is coming for you all. And it isn't just me. Chris is actually going to, we should tag team a bit on some of the slides we're doing here for Terry Drip. But first, we have a great announcement. This group accomplished something. It has emitted a document that has been approved by that august body, the Internet Engineering Steering Group. And that I will work with the RCED to get this completely finalized. At the last minute, of course, the ISG had some actually very helpful feedback on the document. We did add on a privacy consideration section that is completely new, that basically talked about the fact that, yes, we are creating in Modern, we're proposing to have these databases, these services, they're going to house these records. And well, there are some privacy implications of that. These things may have more who-is-like data, I guess, than we typically see in telephone-style databases today. And we're going to create new centralized places where that could potentially be accessed by adversaries. And so we put in some language that was very clear about what we thought the risks were anyway. So caveat emptor, if this ever is no longer a science project and is actually something people want to do in the world, God forbid. And there are also numerous small editorial fixes for which we were grateful. I think we got most of them in. I know, Ben, your comment about whether or not IPPBXs had already had this capability to dynamically allocate numbers to phones. I think there's something slightly different about this than that. But for the most part, I think we put in virtually all of that. So one thing I took away from that conversation, there were a lot of comments, I think, from Opsteer, among others, that kind of about, well, what is the security story? Okay, you're talking about credentials and what are the chains going to be? They're going to provide the authority that this requires. And of course, we have all this adjacent work over in STIR and now in ACME that talks about what the authority is that those credentials project, and moreover, how you could get enrolled in a system that would actually dole these credentials out to you. And it certainly makes a lot more sense, right, when you just assume all that work is out there. And honestly, one of the reasons why Chris and I just kind of gradually kick this down the can session after session is because we've been trying to get STIR to a point where it actually informs us enough that we're able to go forward with it. Now I think we have the core STIR docs out, another win that we'll clap about in another working group. But because of that, I think we now have an opportunity really to show how those credentials could be leveraged to do a new style of completely decentralized numbering administration that would be crazily distinct from the way things work today. That's our science project. That's mostly what we're going to be talking about. But just if you care, we do still have an opportunity to make changes to this document at the RFC editor stage. People here want to check it out, make sure that the stuff that we jammed in at the last minute, for privacy considerations, is actually sane. Feel free to read it, send me any comments, very much appreciated. Next. Terry and Drip. So this is like our new document for this time. It seems like every time we come to this, there's like some new use case. We're being told for like years when we were starting this up, oh my God, this is like total science fiction. Why isn't this in the IETF? There's like no practical use for this at the moment. And so we've produced this parade, I guess, of use cases that have been progressively more interesting from my perspective to kind of show what we might be able to do with this. And again, now that STIR is a bit more concrete, I think we can make a better case for that than we could in the past. Next slide. So first of all, we just had like acronym soup up on the first slide. So for those of you who have unwisely, against my repeated entreaties, stayed in this room without having really any idea what it is we talk about here, we have two documents that Chris Wendt and I have been working on. One is called Terry. Terry is, it's a record format. We kind of made it relatively protocol and encoding agnostic. It's really more of an information model than anything else that kind of talks about what we think records should be that describe telephone numbers. We're gonna have like detailed slides about this later, but think about it like one of the things that makes our effort here in Modern different from what we did in the past with enum and drinks and spearmint and so on, is we kind of adopt a life cycle ecosystem approach to thinking about numbering, how you create a record that shows the acquisition of a number, how you can then manage it, change things about it, change the administrative and service data associated with it, and finally how you can resolve that, how something enum-like can go kind of get that record. And the thing that is different from all the previous ways we did this is there's now like one record format that all these things use. The various other ways we looked at this in the past, we had kind of, well, here's one resolution protocol, and it has this syntax and semantics to it, and here's this provisioning protocol, and actually they're like not aligned. So having like one record thing was kind of one of the formative principles here. And Drip is work that Chris did. Chris, you're welcome to get up and describe Drip yourself if you'd like, or I can talk about it a little bit. Why don't you talk about it? It's your document.
Yeah, so DRIP came out of a lot of discussion and some work that we did to adopt, pretty standard gossip protocols out there. It's meant to be conservative in terms of synchronization of data and making it complete. It contains a voting mechanism that allows all the nodes in the network to validate the information. It has a voting procedure and then a commit procedure as well. So it's meant for not extremely large distributed nodes, but reasonable size, complementary to what we would typically see in a telephone network.
Very good. So we had kind of taken it as an action for some time to try to show how these two pieces of work that we're doing relatively distinctly could work together here. And last time in Singapore, Chris and I got together and hacked at least some slideware about this. And this time we have a draft. There's actually something you can read that at least gives use cases and basic ideas behind this. So next slide. A lot of people asked when we talked about Terry and its operations, and I do have a Terry deck after this. I'll at least run through a bit to go through it. But there's this notion in Terry that there are simple client-server operations, like you see here between the client and the services, where you say things like, oh, I need a new telephone number. Can you allocate me one from inventory? Or, oh, I'm trying to place a call. Can I talk to the service and ask if there are any service records associated with this telephone number? What we didn't really talk about much, though, is how Terry services might spread information to each other. And so kind of the low-hanging fruit that seemed to be the intersection of the way Chris was thinking and I was thinking was we would use this nice gossip protocol to actually, it's kind of the server-to-server protocol for this. And if you imagine that there were large communication service providers, people like a Comcast and AT&T and so on, they might have a service or maybe multiple service instances like this that would have records in them, and they would spread these records around to these various services, and then within their individual networks, they would kind of cache all of the valid records that are being shared in the gossip network at all of the nodes. You would then be able to perform the Terry operations, acquisition, management, retrieval, and so on to take care of that. So this seems to be the simplest way to describe the intersection between the way Chris and I had been thinking about these things. So next slide. The end goal of this is to try to design a distributed registry. For those of you, again, who are here for the first time, some years ago now, 3 years ago maybe, there was a meeting at the FCC in Washington, United States, to talk about well, how can we kind of blue sky about what the future of numbering databases could be? And there was a great deal of interest there in doing a distributed registry as an alternative to the centralized TN database registries that exist today. These are things like the LERG and the MPAC and so on. But to be clear, although that is one of the motivating problems behind modern, this is not proposing to eliminate or change any particular existing thing that is being deployed today. This is a science project. There are a bunch of ways that we could kind of kick the tires on this that we'll talk about. This is not like ready to go and replace anything practical at this moment in time. So there's not the intention of this exercise to do that. We want to try to define something that would be suitable for experiments in actual deployed environments without actually replacing like the guts of anything today. So yeah, we have this as DRIP providing a way to share Terry records between these services. The most interesting use cases, I think, for this, we talked about using DRIP just basically as a transport protocol for the way we define the Terry operations. And we have like a mock-up JSON format for Terry requests and responses that go between clients and servers. That didn't really excite me in any way though. So I think the interesting ones are all ones where there are numbering spaces that are shared by multiple authorities. And that we assume that, when I showed that picture of the participants in the DRIP network kind of at the middle in the previous slide, that they all share some authority over a space that allows them access to a naming resource that's in them. We're going to talk about them here as CSPs, and this last bullet here is really only for people that really follow Terry closely. There's kind of a distinction between a CSP and a registrar. We're going to gloss over for the purposes of this discussion. Think about the CSPs like they're carriers, people that would own numbering resources. Next slide. So self-allocation is the one that I get excited about anyway when I think about how this could work. Imagine a world where you have multiple CSPs who all have some kind of a credential. It would be like a STIR credential, I think, that allows them to sign for telephone numbers that are in a given numbering block. But initially, there are actually no numbers in that range that are allocated to any of them. All those CSPs have the credential that allows them to self-allocate resources within that block. If they are so inclined. It's perhaps easiest, like the closest thing we have to something like this today is the way that like free phone stuff works in the United States, where for 800 numbers, it's different from ordinary geographic numbers. There are kind of these organizations that exist specifically to kind of acquire an 800 number because there are particular numbers you want, right? It's closer to like a domain name model if you think about it. You want 1-800-United-1 or something, right? And so you kind of go to these businesses that acquire those for you, and then a carrier will serve that particular number on your behalf. Bit of an oversimplification, but there are these things called RESTborgs that do that. You can kind of think about it like the RESTborgs today have access to this free phone numbering space. They can kind of come in almost on a first come first served basis and be like, actually, I'd like to buy that number in this space in order to serve this particular customer. And what we're looking at here are ways we could automate that process to allow something similar to self-allocation, where you could just say, okay, this resource is available, provided I'm one of the entities that has been vetted and has the proper credentials, I can just create a Terry record, push that out and say, I'm now the authority for that number. And if everyone in the gossip network agrees, then you are. And I think these are the fascinating set of cases. So next slide. Yeah, I mean, in all these cases, whether we assume that CSP is going to be allocating to itself a block or a single number, it works pretty much the same way. This would be something where the CSP has gone through some vetting process, and this is the stuff we do in Acme, where we make policy decisions to decide what kind of credentials you can get. Once you have this proper STIR credential, you just create the record you want, and this is like a blob of JSON, right, as apparently everything is these days. We'll figure out what the schema is that we'll use to define this later. We're not going to do that here. You sign that then with this credential, and provided that the peer nodes in your gossip network trust the credential you've used for this and the trust anchor for it, then it just becomes valid. It propagates through the network and gets cached everywhere, and that is now a record that is eligible for someone to retrieve and to use as either administrative or service record. We do have this concept, and we have a picture of this as well, that it could be in order to enforce particular policies about self-allocation. We would have these policy nodes. We even have, I think, a picture of a policy node. Basically something whose job it is to listen to what's going on. And even if it's not like, oh, well, you're trying to allocate a number that's already allocated to me and I don't like that. Instead, if you're just allocating a lot of numbers, maybe the policy node would start voting no, right? Because it's there to enforce some policy that's in the distributed registry. But the idea is to eliminate this kind of single centralized point you have to go to that is keeping track of everything and to kind of get its permission to allocate any number to yourself, and instead to allow something that is more anarchic, I guess. Something that doesn't have that requirement for a centralized authority in it. Chris, did you want to add anything to this? This is
You're reading my mind. Yeah, no, I think the other two benefits that we've talked about is it's a much more real-time process. So everything gets distributed, hopefully milliseconds, but maybe seconds at worst case. And then what was the other one I was thinking of? I just blanked on it. Oh yeah, the other one is having a local copy of the registry. Obviously when you do calls and you want to query databases, you don't want to go across networks. So it's real-time updates and locally available to good properties for a telephone service provider.
Because you think about it today, I mean, the way these things work, you tend to have to go to a centralized registry, be like, hey, I want to make this change. And that centralized registry then replicates that database down to all of these nodes that exist in all the CSP networks that are then accessed to make routing decisions and things like this. So this kind of short circuits that, where instead of you having to go up to that process and then have it come back down to everybody, you just blurt it out, and provided that it's legit, everybody goes along. Next slide. There's also this concept, there's this distinction between allocation and assignment that's significant in the telephone network. And again, if you're not deep in the weeds of this may seem kind of arbitrary, but there's just the difference between, a carrier having a number in inventory, like acquiring 1,000 block, and it actually some individual number being allocated to a consumer. And today, a lot of decisions are made about whether or not to grant carriers additional inventory based on the actual percent of allocation and so on. It's in the blocks they've already been issued. And so we created this mechanism. It's actually in a draft called Terry Valid that lets you see not only that any given number in a numbering space is a real number, but that it's been allocated and or assigned down to some individuals. There's kind of a few states that we identified in that draft. And the process here is very similar. Like if a particular CSP, like say Comcast, has a block allocated to it and then wants to move a particular number into a state of assignment, that's just the generation of a new administrative Terry record that gets pushed out through the network. Everybody ends up caching it. Again, maybe somebody like a policy node is in the gossip network just to listen to those assignment records going through to be able to say, oh, I am tracking this person's inventory. They're actually using this. So when they then need to go and say, I need a new 1,000 block next week, you have some notion of whether or not they're making responsible use of the namespace. Next slide. The most interesting of these are porting cases. That is a case where a number is moving from the control of one CSP to another CSP. These are cases we think that can be resolved, though, in a network like this pretty simply, where basically the new network just issues a record saying, actually, that telephone number belongs to me now. And if the old network agrees, then it doesn't vote no in the gossip network. Very simple. There are a lot of hard edges on this. I mean, these are the use cases we're defining. We're just trying to show the ways that we think at a high level this could work. Of course, what you don't want to end up with is different networks being, different records being cached simultaneously that apply to the same number, some of which have stale data, some of which have actually, current data, and that it's up to the relying parties to ascertain which is which. So there needs to be some kind of a, flushing mechanism for older records as we go through things like porting. So we're kind of glossing over those details there, but these are use cases that we think are worth focusing on. I guess the real question we have for the group in terms of things we could do with the science project, and it is a science project. I wish Henning was here. He really he was the quest giver who put us on this quest in the first place back in the day. We think this is a reasonable kind of direction to push forward, given what the problem space is. We think we can run these use cases down and do something practical with them. We think it's relatively implementable. Again, I think there are experiments we could imagine that would use this that could have some interesting properties. I think next slide. Oh, yeah, it's just a picture of the policy. And probably should have just had that earlier. So anyway, next slide. So yeah, I think this gets us a bit closer to an architecture of how Terry and Drip could work together. Last time we showed up, we kind of had some pie in the sky, thinking about it. This shows some use cases. This shows some things we think practically could try to do with the building blocks that we have in place here. We'd like some feedback. This is just Chris and I like kicking this around, right? So if other people are interested in this, it of course all depends on us having a green light for Terry and Drip themselves, which are still not working group items. They're still just kind of things that have been floating here as we've been waiting for STIR to wrap up and waiting to get the modern framework through the system. But we're now, at a place where there's probably some bandwidth to do this. So what do people think? So I'm almost interested for the daring people that stayed here who don't care about this ordinarily. What do you make of this? Does this seem like something we should be trying to do at the IETF? Does this seem like we've carved out problems that seem tractable from these use cases we could try to address? Any thoughts? I know it's fascinating stuff, this numbering.
So Martin Thompson, do you have someone that's going to ship something like this?
Do we have what, sorry?
Who do you imagine is going to ship this? Has anyone expressed intent?
I mean, we could talk, you have a CSP behind you there who's working on this. He would be the closest thing I'd say to somebody who is interested in this. And
what do the federation cases look like as opposed to just simply using this within your own infrastructure? That's the question.
Yeah, so like John said, I would echo, this is I think it's getting fairly mature in its thoughts. It also seems to align very well, like John said, with the sort of graduation of STIR into something with a framework where we can apply credentials, as well as some other industry things talking about new networks, potentially all IP type of networks. There seems to be a lot of, snowball effect happening here that we are very interested in from a Comcast point of view to push the industry forward here.
Eric Criscarella. Instead of this complicated gossip thing, have you considered just registering numbers in the blockchain, funding it by Sipcoin?
Thank you. Yes, yeah, I don't have it on me, but so no, I do think that there is potentially room for like a ledger to play a role in this, and something Chris and I have actually talked about. But because again, the way that these records are being issued, they because of exactly the problems I was just describing of how do you age out the old records and things like that. A ledger actually makes a lot of sense for some of the aspects of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting discussion to have. I think DRIP is meant to be as simple as possible. Yeah.
More seriously, the question of whether you want a gossip protocol or some other consensus protocol, I think really depends on the threat model you have available to you. My sense of the threat model you had was that the people who were doing this were largely trusting each other as actors. If not, then like you will need something much more aggressive than it seems like you have.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think blockchain is like the worst possible consensus mechanism. So like, unless you actually need it, we shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the security, we like it to align with the STIR stuff that we're doing. Or at least security of the records themselves. Security access to the system, that's a different thing, but.
But, I feel obliged when we talk about these things, like, I can come here and talk about this like time after time at the IETF. I'm looking around of like usual suspect carrier people that I would hope to see in a room like this who are not here. So So, I'm a bit on the fence, right? I mean, I'm happy to do this as a science project. I think there is some value in this ultimately. But I would like to see more interest, reaction before I feel like I'm going to really do much other than kick this can, like every IETF, a little farther.
Yeah, so Martin Thompson, you've done some pretty solid work on this thus far, but if no one's going to buy it just yet, maybe now is the time to sort of say, well, it exists, and we're going to wait till we get some more deployment experience with STIR and see what sort of problems come up. And maybe this will be the thing that we have in our back pockets when those problems come up, and maybe blockchains. I mean, yay. Yeah.
Okay. Good to know. All right, next slide. So this is why we could give away time, by the way, because it's just like me talking here I have like 15 slides, so we're almost done now. I did want to talk a bit more about Terry, though, in the sense that I did make a couple changes to it, and I'm not going to, I have like all the Terry tutorial slides here. I don't know if I'm actually going to bother even running through them today, but next slide. So we've now advanced this to a 0.4, and to be clear, so when we talk about Terry interfacing with DRIP, there are also a bunch of other use cases for Terry we've defined here. There's one for nationwide number portability. There's one for publishing the list of like valid numbers or invalid numbers for a numbering plan, which is something that is very complementary to STIR that we want to use to try to, again, cut down obvious robocalls that are using numbers or even real numbers, right? So there are a bunch of these kinds of use cases for it that we've defined. Most of the things we're doing in this group in some way rely on this. We now have this up to a 0.4. I think there's still a lot in it that we would need to flesh out if we're going to use it for any particular application. Because it is, like I said, it's mostly an information model. We've mocked up some encodings for it and things like that. But it's not something that we have tried to produce what I would describe as an implementable specification for it up until this point. In part because we've just been trying to figure out if we think there's enough of a confluence of use cases we've built around it that it's worth adopting and worth doing real work on. Next slide. I don't even want to do it. Anyway, so okay, I'll say this much. So the main change we made in this largely resulted from the work we were looking at with DRIP is to kind of make the Terry record and the Terry operations slightly more decoupled. That's the main change that's in this. It used to be we kind of led talking about the Terry operations, about the ways that you acquire records, the way that you, basically the client server operation part of it. And I think we're now gonna shift the architectural influence, architectural direction of the draft to be much more about, okay, here's the records, and we could even push the operations into ultimately a separate specification. I think what we want to say is the core of Terry is the records, because that's a component that would be used by DRIP in a very different way that would be used in the kind of client server cases that we're describing. Same records, that's our defining principle here in Modern. We're going to use this single record format. They're always going to be signed by the same kind of credentials. But that's the only real change that we made to the Terry model since last time. And I mean, I can give a Terry tutorial and advertisement of why I think it's interesting for like the 57th time here, but I honestly don't even want to bother. So flip it back all the way. Just go quick. We'll pretend this is like one of those Pekka Krucha things. Yeah, just except I'm not even going to say anything. It's just going to go by. Keep going. So we've got acquisition, management, retrieval. There's queries. There's responses. There's great stuff in it. Moving it down to this slide. Like. Same questions, if people think that some of the use cases we've defined here, things like nationwide number portability, there are people at Addis talking about that potentially would use this, or the publication of the list of valid numbers is an interesting enough use case to warrant just going the next step, just saying, okay, we've messed around with this for a bit, we think we understand why this is useful and important. Should we make this a working group item and try to flesh it out a bit more? That's the only area we want to discuss. And I mean, the answer is no. Like, look, man, we got other stuff to do. There's like a ton of other things we need to do. In some sense, getting the framework document out that we talked about how it had just passed at the beginning of this, that forms a bit of a overall architecture for how we think things like STIR and ACME fit together. And there's some value in having that framework independently of ever doing any subsequent work towards this. But this is a way to approach registries that, again, I think provides a much richer set of services than anything we have for dealing with telephone numbers on the internet today. It's built from the ground up with security as its kind of defining principle. I think this is ultimately where Enum failed, I think, in some respects, is that it focused much more on the kind of the flat file resolution question of, okay, I've got a telephone number, can I get the URI for it? Rather than the question of who should have authority for telephone numbers on the internet, and why should I believe any of the flat files that I ask how to route things? So, like I said, I'm happy to work on this. I'm equally happy to like go home and do something else. But I think we need to get to a room where people are like, hey, this is worth doing, or I'm going to stop. Any comments on that? That's good. That's good feedback, actually. Oh, Chris, you're getting up.
I was going to maybe echo what Martin mentioned about, we are sort of in a little bit early, but for people to get really excited about it, I think the framework we defined, I think originally we were very far apart, and now we're, I think, pretty aligned on what that, at least between you and me. And we've gotten some agreement from other folks in the past. So, I mean, I think, obviously, I think there's a place for having this defined and ready for if something comes along, and there is an opportunity to be a little bit more progressive on how we manage telephone numbers in the future. But yeah, I think the sort of noticeable silence is mostly because it's a little bit early for that. It's good to be prepared, but that's the way things goes.
I mean, consider this like one thumb up. I mean, I guess from my perspective, like these seem like a good addition of like what I'd like the world to look like. But I'm not like a carrier, and like I'm a consumer of this technology. So if you tell me or someone tells me that like people are interested in doing this, I'm interested in helping. But I'm not interested in pushing against something that nobody wants. So nobody will deploy whether the customers want it or not. So I think that for me, that's the predicate question: is like, are the people who want to deploy this technology? In which case, I'm excited about it. Otherwise, I'm quietly excited, but not excited enough to do anything.
Sure. And I mean, just in the interest of full disclosure, I work for the North American Numbering Plan Administrator at the moment, right? And so it's not like this is entirely something that is. That we have no leverage on, right? If we wanted to do something like this. Yes, Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff Hodges, PayPal. So we are coming to the conclusion that doing security sensitive operations via, for example, SMS, is not going to go away. People are going to keep doing that. In fact, it's probably going to get even more down the road in the future. And we would really like to see those be able to be done, use SMS in a secure fashion. How do we urge that along for security to get built into that?
STIR's got your back on that. This is the problem. Like STIR solves the problems people want, that they know that are problems because they're security problems.
Well,
this is like the back office of STIR.
Right, that's what I mean. And without this, does STIR get, without something that answers these questions and stuff, is STIR really actually practically deployable?
So I think it is, because again, so here's the problem. Like there's the ACME part, right, that really governs like how you get the certs and how you decide that someone should be able to get one of these certs. And once you've got it, then you use it to get the SMSs signed and everything else. This is much more about things like, how do you get a telephone number in the first place? Assuming a world where like databases are really, where people are transitioning away from traditional PSTN structures. And so you've got to be able to do like something to manage what the routes are associated with numbers and things like that. So this is the problem, is that those things are actually, I think we got that down. This is like the way back office
Okay.
behind all that.
So that, yeah, I was going to tug your sleeve about the stir stuff anyway. So you think the stir stuff's practically deployable?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
There's a lot going on about that in the industry now, and there's, I mean,
Okay.
so it's,
So we can have a separate conversation about
we should do that. Yeah.
So thank you for the clarification.
Dan York, and in a previous number of years ago, I worked in an environment where this kind of thing was somewhat critical in a space. But I guess my question for you to answer what you're asking of this group is, it sort of echoes what Echo was saying. Are there people looking to deploy this now, or are we building something for the time when we think people might want to deploy it?
So so remember, this started at the FCC as a please blue sky. Now, the IP transition is coming. We know that the traditional SS7 structures are going to go away at some point. What would it be like if we just had to design this from the ground up today so that it would work well with the internet? And obviously STIR is a part of that, Acme is a part of that, but this is like where all the frameworky, like OSS-y backend, this is the problem, is nobody cares about like OSS in a place like this, right? But you need OSS to actually do these things, right? Like, and so.
Right, I guess, and I agree with you on that point, I guess, and that's the question is, so who's the consumer of this right now? Or is this that we don't have a consumer and that's part of the challenge?
So it depends on the use case, interestingly, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, like the valid number list thing, potentially that's something like we could just publish that tomorrow if we thought people wanted it, right? And maybe Chris would use it. I don't know if we did. It would be like that, right? Where this is. There are things that are easy to do with Terry like that, like the valid number list, right? To say, okay, here's all the any number that's in the North American Numbering Plan that is valid is going to fit within the following constraints. And so any call you see that is from a number other than this, probably you don't need to route that.
Okay, but then this also could be used in the allocation. If I have a new app and I want to spin that up and have a number on it, I could do a dip into this to be able to get a number.
That's much more like the Terry drip stuff that we're just talking about, where that can get very dynamic, very real time in number allocation. Yeah, we want to be able to do that too, but the point is that's not the thing that I think AT&T is energized about, right? Okay. Which is why Martin is somewhere else this morning.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Mary Barnes. So I mean, I think this is at a good place now. I'm starting to get into your space and all the numbering stuff, and it's pretty crazy what has to go on behind the scenes to manage this stuff right now. I mean, it's insane. So I mean, in the long term, I think this is a good idea, but it is ways out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to, this is Chris Went, I was going to make similar comments to Mary, maybe to recognize sort of the pain of managing numbers where it's quite often done in Excel spreadsheets and things even today. So I think this is a ripe area for innovation to get to the point where if you believe in the future of telephone numbers and telephone number management and how they are managed and the ability to dynamically allocate things, which I think, assuming that they're relevant going forward, that's a very important area to do. So just sort of trying to give some insight into why this work is important going forward.
Well, and there are a bunch of people who are trying to figure out things like how you do NNP, the nationwide number portability, or the valid number lists. And if we think that we have the good document formats for that, right, in Terry, those are much more low-hanging fruit than doing dynamic number allocation, like in Terry Drip and things like that. So, I mean, I guess what it comes down to at the end of the day is if we want to push any of those more low-hanging fruit kind of use cases forward, we need to have Terry to a point where it's more fleshed out. And I'm not going to do that unless people here seem to care.
Hi, Russ Pinar. Not with a carrier, but deal with this landscape a lot. And 2 thumbs up. And if you need energy and help, I'm happy to volunteer.
Oh, that's a first. Listen to that. I'd like a round of applause for that. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. I think.
So you had the adoption as the question there. I feel support for. I think there's still the open question of how strong of a pull there is to use it, but
Well, I mean, so I think at this point we should adopt something, or maybe we should quiet down and focus our energy somewhere else for a bit.
right.
Because, like, again, I can keep coming back here and giving the same spiel about this, but
So do we adopt? I'm not.
I mean, I would take a hum in the room. Honestly, I'm not. Look, man, I'm not joking. We got other things we could be doing than this. So
Okay,
I mean,
so the hum is whether we should adopt this and continue working on it.
yeah. Well, the hum I would like is, people, hum if you would like to, adopt Terry as a baseline to work on. There's some more practical problems, some more science fiction long-term problems, but hum if you would like to adopt Terry as a baseline for the record format for the group, and then take a hum against. And if there's any noise in the room on either of those, we can take that as some indication of what people think.
Right. Okay, I won't restate that so eloquently stated. So the positive hum first.
Somebody's at the
Eric is coming to the mic.
Eric Berger. Oh. Hi, Eric. Can we take the other? Should we take the other hum first, or? Oh, sorry. Please.
So, so long as it doesn't interfere with the stir work, it has in the past, and there's still stuff I think you're working on in stir. If it doesn't, then great. But if it does, we know what's more important.
Yeah, that no confusion about that, man. Like I said, so because this is recognized to be a science project, it's not exactly going to get front burner attention, right, at any phase of this. So, do you want to do the hum against as well?
Yeah. Is that it, Eric?
Yeah, that's it. Thanks. You can turn me off so we don't feedback.
Okay. Okay, so the hum against. Sounds like the hum 4 has it.
Yeah, it was about the maximum level of enthusiasm I would plausibly accept from the room that I heard from that hum. So, okay. I mean, so should I issue a version of this that says draft IETF modern?
I will take it to the list and then we can do so. Yeah.
Okay. That at least would be a step forward on this to a place. And yes, help from anybody who wants to actually help flesh this out would be great, because it is still, it's pretty much just an information model at this point. So.
Okay.
You have 5 minutes
5
of your life
minutes
back.
left.
Thank you.
If you didn't sign the blue sheets, I'm not there around someplace. Back and back. We get to keep coming, huh?